The small dog trembled in the corner of the abandoned warehouse, her matted fur covering bones that pressed against her thin skin. Sequoia had no idea how long she had been surviving in this cold, dark place. Days blended into nights, and hunger had become her constant companion. The concrete floor offered no comfort, and the bitter wind that swept through the broken windows made her curl into an even tighter ball. She had once known warmth. Somewhere in her distant memory, there were soft touches and gentle voices, but those memories felt like dreams now, fading with each passing moment of her harsh reality. The warehouse district where she found herself was a forgotten corner of the city, where people rarely ventured and hope seemed to have abandoned the place long ago. Every morning, Sequoia would force herself to stand on shaking legs and search for food. Sometimes she found scraps near the dumpsters behind a restaurant 2 blocks away. Other times she went days without eating anything at all. Her brown eyes, once probably bright and full of life, had grown dull with fear and exhaustion. She had learned to avoid people after several encounters with those who threw rocks or shouted cruel words when they spotted her. The weather was growing colder as autumn deepened. Sequoia's thin coat provided little protection against the dropping temperatures. She had found a cardboard box in one corner of the warehouse and had claimed it as her shelter. It wasn't much, but it blocked some of the wind. At night she would lie there listening to the sounds of the city in the distance, wondering if tomorrow might be different, if tomorrow might bring something other than fear and hunger. One particularly cold morning, Sequoia noticed something unusual. A woman had started walking through the warehouse district with a bag slung over her shoulder. The dog watched from her hiding spot behind some old crates as the woman moved slowly, looking around carefully. Sequoia's instinct told her to stay hidden. Humans had proven to be unpredictable, and she couldn't afford to take chances. The woman came closer, and Sequoia caught the scent of something that made her empty stomach growl. Food. Real food. Not garbage, not moldy scraps, but actual fresh food. Her body betrayed her as she shifted slightly, and the movement caught the woman's attention. Their eyes met across the dusty warehouse floor. Sequoia expected shouting or objects being thrown her way. Instead, the woman slowly knelt down and reached into her bag. She pulled out a small bowl and some food, placing them on the ground. Then she did something Sequoia hadn't experienced in so long. She had almost forgotten it was possible. The woman backed away, giving her space, speaking in soft, soothing tones that didn't carry any threat. The dog waited for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Her hunger finally overcame her fear, and she crept forward on her belly, moving inch by inch toward the bowl. Her eyes never left the woman, watching for any sign of danger. When she reached the food, she ate so quickly she barely tasted it, expecting it to be snatched away at any moment. The woman didn't move closer. She just sat there at a respectful distance and watched with sad eyes that seemed to understand Sequoia's pain. When the bowl was empty, Sequoia retreated back to her cardboard shelter, but something had shifted inside her. For the first time in longer than she could remember, her belly wasn't completely empty. The next morning, the woman returned, and the morning after that. Each day she would bring food and water, place them down, and sit at the same distance. She never tried to grab Sequoia or chase her. She just came, brought provisions, and stayed for a little while before leaving. Slowly, very slowly, Sequoia began to wait for these visits. They became the highlight of her day, the one thing she could count on in her uncertain world. After about a week, the woman started sitting a little closer each day. She would talk to Sequoia in that same gentle voice, telling her about her day, about the other animals she had helped, about a warm place where dogs could sleep in soft beds and never worry about where their next meal would come from. Sequoia didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. It was kindness, something she had almost forgotten existed. One morning, Sequoia did something brave. When the woman came with food, the dog didn't run back to her shelter after eating. She stayed near the empty bowl, just a few feet from where the woman sat. It was the closest she had been to any human in months. Her heart pounded in her chest, and every muscle in her body was ready to flee if needed. But the woman simply smiled, a tear rolling down her cheek, and whispered words of encouragement. The trust was paper-thin and fragile, but it was there. After weeks of living in constant fear, after endless days of hunger and cold, after believing that the whole world was harsh and cruel, Sequoia had found one person who seemed different. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if this woman would eventually turn on her like others had, but for the first time in a very long time, A tiny spark of something resembling hope flickered in her chest. The woman reached into her bag and pulled out a soft blanket, placing it on the ground between them. Sequoia watched carefully as the woman stood up slowly, preparing to leave as she did every day. But today she paused and looked back at the small, frightened dog with eyes full of determination. Tomorrow, those eyes seemed to say, would be different. Tomorrow would be the day everything changed. The next morning arrived with heavy clouds that promised rain. Sequoia woke in her cardboard shelter, feeling the dampness in the air. She had learned to dread rainy days because her shelter would turn soggy and useless, leaving her exposed to the cold water that seemed to seep into her very bones. But today she felt different. Today the woman would come, and somehow that made even the threatening weather seem less frightening. Right on schedule, the familiar figure appeared at the entrance of the warehouse. But this time she wasn't alone. Another person walked beside her, a man carrying what looked like a large blanket or net. Sequoia's newfound trust shattered instantly. Her survival instincts screamed at her to run, to hide, to get as far away as possible. She had been tricked before, lured in with kindness only to face cruelty. The woman seemed to sense Sequoia's panic. She held up her hand, signaling the man to stop, and approached alone as she had done for weeks. She placed the food down and sat in her usual spot, talking in that calm voice that had become familiar. But Sequoia couldn't eat. Her eyes were fixed on the stranger, her body tense and ready to bolt at any second. The woman opened her bag and pulled out something Sequoia had never seen before. It was a small toy, a stuffed animal that looked like a little bear. She rolled it gently across the floor toward Sequoia. Despite her fear, the dog's curiosity was sparked. She had never owned a toy. She had never played. The concept was foreign to her, but something about the soft object called to a part of her she thought had died. Minutes ticked by as the woman waited patiently. The man stayed back, sitting down against the far wall to make himself less threatening. Finally, Sequoia took a tentative step toward the toy, then another. When she reached it, she sniffed it carefully, then picked it up gently in her mouth. It was soft and didn't smell like food, but it felt nice to hold. The woman's face lit up with a smile, and she clapped her hands softly. She pulled out another toy from her bag, this one making a squeaking sound when she pressed it. Despite herself, Sequoia's ears perked up at the noise. The woman squeezed it again, and something unexpected happened. Sequoia's tail moved. Just a tiny wag, barely noticeable, but it was there. It was the first time in months that she had wagged her tail. Encouraged by this small victory, the woman began explaining her plan in a gentle voice. She told Sequoia about the rescue center, about warm beds and medical care, about other dogs who had been scared just like her and were now happy and safe. She explained that they needed to take her there today because the weather was getting worse, and the warehouse was no place for any living creature. As if on cue, rain began to fall. First just a few drops, then a steady drizzle that quickly turned into a downpour. Water started dripping through the holes in the warehouse roof, creating puddles on the concrete floor. Sequoia's cardboard shelter was already getting soaked. She looked at it, then at the woman, then back at her disintegrating shelter. The woman stood up slowly and pulled out a carrier from behind some boxes where she had hidden it earlier. It was lined with the soft blanket she had brought the day before. She opened the door and placed some treats inside, then stepped back. Sequoia understood what was being asked of her. This was the moment of choice. She could stay here in the cold, wet warehouse, clinging to the independence that had kept her alive but also kept her suffering. Or she could trust this woman who had shown her nothing but kindness for weeks. The decision wasn't easy. Every fiber of Sequoia's being told her that enclosed spaces were dangerous, that going with humans led to pain. But as the rain soaked through her thin fur and the temperature dropped, she looked at the woman's patient, caring face. She thought about the warm food that had been given freely every day. She remembered the gentleness in every interaction. Sequoia took one step toward the carrier, then another. The woman remained still, barely breathing, not wanting to scare her away. The man against the wall didn't move either. It was just Sequoia and her choice. She reached the carrier and sniffed it carefully. The blanket inside smelled clean and felt dry. The treats looked delicious. With a deep breath that seemed to come from her soul, Sequoia stepped inside the carrier. The moment she did, her body started shaking uncontrollably. Every instinct screamed that she had made a terrible mistake. But the woman's voice came through the fear, soft and reassuring. She didn't close the carrier door right away. Instead, she let Sequoia sit there with the option to leave if she wanted to. After a few minutes, when Sequoia showed no signs of bolting, the woman gently closed the door. She immediately covered the carrier with a light cloth so Sequoia wouldn't feel so exposed and vulnerable. Then she picked it up carefully, keeping her movements smooth and steady. The man came forward to help, and together they carried Sequoia out of the warehouse that had been her prison for so long. As they stepped outside, Sequoia felt the rain on the cloth covering her carrier. She heard the sounds of the city more clearly now, the cars and voices and life happening all around. Her heart pounded with fear and uncertainty. She had no idea where she was going or what would happen next. All she had was a fragile thread of trust in a woman who had shown her kindness when the rest of the world had turned its back. The carrier was placed in the back of a vehicle, secured carefully so it wouldn't slide around. The engine started and they began to move. Sequoia had been in a vehicle before, though the memories were hazy and unpleasant. But this time felt different. The woman's voice continued to drift back to her, speaking those same soothing words, telling her she was safe now, that everything would be okay. As the warehouse district faded behind them and they drove toward an unknown future, Sequoia curled up on the soft blanket inside the carrier. She was terrified, but she was also warm and dry for the first time in months. The tiny spark of hope that had flickered to life over the past weeks grew just a little bit brighter. Maybe, just maybe, the woman's words were true. Maybe there really was a better life waiting somewhere ahead. The vehicle came to a stop after what felt like an eternity to Sequoia. She heard doors opening and felt her carrier being lifted again, this time carried through what sounded like a busy place. There were voices everywhere, some human and some animal. She could hear dogs barking in the distance, and the sound made her both nervous and curious. She hadn't been around other dogs in so long. The carrier was set down gently on what felt like a table. The cloth covering was removed and bright lights made Sequoia squint. She found herself in a clean, white room that smelled strange but not unpleasant. The woman who had rescued her was there, along with a new person wearing a white coat. This person had kind eyes behind glasses and spoke in a voice as gentle as the woman's. The carrier door opened, but nobody reached in to grab her. Instead, they simply waited, giving her the choice to come out on her own. Sequoia stayed frozen in place. The room was too bright, too clean, too different from anything she had known recently. But the woman who had been feeding her for weeks sat down on the floor and called to her softly, holding out her hand. It took nearly 20 minutes, but eventually, Sequoia crept out of the carrier. The moment she emerged fully, she could see her reflection in the shiny metal of a cabinet, and what she saw shocked her. She barely recognized herself. Her fur was matted into clumps. Her ribs showed clearly through her sides and her eyes looked haunted. She had known she was in bad shape, but seeing it was different from feeling it. The person in the white coat, who the woman called Dr. Sarah, began examining Sequoia from a distance first. She looked at her teeth, her eyes, her ears, all while maintaining a calm demeanor and explaining everything she was doing. Sequoia learned that she was severely underweight, dehydrated, and suffering from several infections. She had fleas, worms, and her paws were injured from walking on rough surfaces without proper care. The examination was gentle but thorough. There were moments when Sequoia wanted to snap or run, especially when Dr. Sarah had to touch sore spots. But each time her fear spiked, the woman was there, stroking her head softly and whispering encouragement. It was clear that this woman had become Sequoia's anchor, the one familiar thing in this strange new world. Dr. Sarah explained that Sequoia would need several treatments over the coming weeks. She would need medicine for the infections, special food to help her gain weight safely, and lots of rest. But first she needed a bath. The very word made the staff exchange knowing looks. Getting a traumatized, scared dog into water was never easy. They moved to a different room where a large tub waited. The water was warm and had a gentle medicinal smell. Sequoia's legs locked when she saw it. Water meant vulnerability, meant being unable to escape quickly. But she was so dirty, so uncomfortable in her matted fur. That part of her actually wanted to be clean again. The woman climbed right into the tub area with her, sitting in her regular clothes without a care for getting wet. This surprised Sequoia. The woman was willing to get uncomfortable just to make her feel safe. Slowly, with infinite patience, they began wetting Sequoia's fur. She trembled through the entire process, but she didn't try to escape. As the warm water soaked through her matted coat and the gentle shampoo was worked into her fur, something remarkable happened. Weeks of grime, fear, and hardship began washing away down the drain. The water turned brown and cloudy with the dirt being removed. The woman worked carefully around the mats, not pulling or hurting, just slowly and methodically cleaning. When they rinsed her off, Sequoia felt lighter somehow. Not just physically, though she certainly was cleaner, but emotionally too. It was as if some of the trauma was being washed away along with the dirt. They wrapped her in warm, fluffy towels and carried her to yet another room, this one cozier and quieter than the others. This room had soft lighting and several comfortable beds scattered around. There were toys in a basket and bowls of fresh water. A few other dogs were there too, all of them rescue cases like her. They looked up with interest but didn't approach, sensing that she needed space. The woman settled Sequoia onto the softest bed, one that seemed to embrace her tired body. For the first time since she could remember, Sequoia was warm, clean, fed, and safe all at the same time. The combination was overwhelming. She had spent so long in survival mode that she didn't know how to process feeling secure. Her body remained tense, ready to spring into action if danger appeared. But as the minutes ticked by and nothing bad happened, her muscles began to relax slightly. The woman sat beside the bed, just keeping her company. She didn't try to pet her excessively or force any interaction. She simply was there, a constant, reassuring presence. She pulled out her phone and showed Sequoia pictures of other dogs who had come to the rescue center, scared and broken, and who had later transformed into happy, healthy pets living in loving homes. Sequoia didn't understand the concept of photographs, but she could sense the woman's joy when talking about these success stories. The woman explained that Sequoia would stay here at the center for a while, getting medical treatment and learning to trust again. When she was ready, they would find her a forever home, a place where she would never have to be hungry or scared again. As evening approached, the woman prepared to leave. Sequoia felt a surge of panic. This woman was her lifeline, her connection to safety. What if she didn't come back? The woman seemed to understand her distress. She knelt down and promised that she would return tomorrow and every day after that, until Sequoia was ready to move to her new home. That night, Sequoia lay on her soft bed in the quiet room. There were night lights that kept the darkness from being complete. She could hear the other dogs breathing peacefully, could smell the clean scent of her own fur, could feel the softness beneath her. Her belly was full of nutritious food, and there was fresh water within reach. It should have been perfect, but Sequoia couldn't relax completely. Years of trauma weren't healed in a single day. She dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every small sound, expecting at any moment for this dream to shatter and for her to find herself back in the cold warehouse. But each time she woke, she was still there in the warm room. Slowly, as the night wore on, her sleep became deeper and more restful. When morning light filtered through the windows, Sequoia opened her eyes to a new day. She was sore from all the handling and examinations of the previous day, but she was also cleaner and more comfortable than she had been in forever, and true to her word. As breakfast time arrived, the woman appeared in the doorway with a smile on her face. She had come back just as she promised. The fragile trust Sequoia had placed in her had been honored, and that meant everything. The morning the woman arrived with news about potential adopters, Sequoia sensed something was different. There was an excitement in the air, mixed with a nervous energy that even the dogs could feel. The woman sat down with Sequoia in their usual spot and explained that a family wanted to meet her. They had read her story online, seen her pictures, and felt an instant connection. Sequoia didn't understand the words, but she could feel the importance of this moment. The woman hugged her close and promised that she had been very careful in screening potential families. These people had experience with rescue dogs, had a quiet home with a fenced yard, and most importantly, they understood that Sequoia would need time and patience to fully adjust to a new environment. The meeting was scheduled for that afternoon. The staff spent extra time making sure Sequoia looked her best. They brushed her coat until it shone, trimmed her nails gently, and put on a pretty new collar that the woman had bought specially for this occasion. Sequoia tolerated all the attention, though she seemed puzzled by the fuss. When the family arrived, Sequoia was in the meeting room with the woman by her side. The door opened, and 3 people walked in, a middle-aged couple and their teenage daughter. They moved slowly and quietly, having been briefed on how to approach a nervous rescue dog. The woman made introductions, explaining Sequoia's background and her journey of recovery. The family sat on the floor, making themselves less imposing. The daughter, whose name was Emma, had tears in her eyes as she looked at Sequoia. She had been following the dog's story online since the rescue, seeing photos and updates about her progress. She had dreamed of meeting her, of perhaps giving her a forever home where she would never be afraid or hungry again. Sequoia watched them carefully from her position pressed against the woman's side. These strangers seemed kind, but she had learned to be cautious. The father reached into a bag and pulled out some treats, the same kind that Sequoia had come to love at the center. He rolled one gently across the floor toward her, not trying to hand-feed her directly, giving her the choice. The treat stopped a few feet away. Sequoia looked at the woman, who nodded encouragingly. Slowly, she moved forward and took the treat. It was delicious as expected. The father smiled and rolled another one, this time a bit closer to where they sat. This pattern continued, each treat bringing Sequoia a little closer to the family, until she was near enough to sniff the daughter's outstretched hand. Emma remained perfectly still, letting Sequoia investigate at her own pace. The dog took in her scent, noting the smell of other dogs on her clothes and what might have been cat fur. This family had other pets which could be either good or bad depending on the situation. But Emma's energy was calm and patient, much like the woman's had been during those early days in the warehouse. After several minutes of investigation, Sequoia made a decision. She had learned to trust her instincts about people, and these seemed like good humans. She allowed Emma to gently scratch under her chin, a spot that she had recently discovered she loved. Emma's touch was gentle and respectful, and when Sequoia leaned into it slightly, the girl's face broke into the biggest smile. The visit lasted about an hour. The family asked many questions about Sequoia's care, her fears and triggers, her favorite activities, and her medical history. The woman answered everything thoroughly, making sure they understood the commitment they would be making. This wasn't just about adopting a cute dog. It was about taking responsibility for a life that had known hardship and needed special understanding. The mother asked about Sequoia's reaction to loud noises, explaining that they lived near a park where there were occasionally fireworks. The woman suggested strategies for managing this, including creating a safe space in the house where Sequoia could retreat when she felt overwhelmed. The father asked about her interaction with other dogs, and they discussed how to properly introduce Sequoia to their older Labrador at home. By the end of the visit, everyone felt positive about the match. But the woman insisted on following the center's protocol. The family would need to come back several more times over the next 2 weeks so Sequoia could get comfortable with them. Then, they would do a home visit to make sure the environment was suitable. Only after all of this would the adoption be finalized. Sequoia watched the family leave with mixed feelings. Part of her had enjoyed meeting them, especially Emma, who had such gentle hands and kind eyes. But another part of her felt anxious about the changes that seemed to be coming. The center had become her safe place, and leaving it meant stepping into uncertainty again. Over the next 2 weeks, the family visited 5 more times. Each visit lasted longer than the previous one, and each time Sequoia felt more comfortable around them. Emma brought books and would sit reading aloud to Sequoia, who found the sound of her voice soothing. The father brought puzzle toys that challenged Sequoia's mind and made her think. The mother brought pictures of their home, showing Sequoia the yard where she would play and the cozy bed they had set up in the living room. The woman who had rescued Sequoia accompanied the family on their home visit. Sequoia rode in the car with her, which helped ease the anxiety of going somewhere new. When they arrived at the house, Sequoia's first impression was of space and light. The home was modest but welcoming, with large windows that let in natural light and a backyard that seemed to stretch on forever. The family's older Labrador, a gentle soul named Cooper, was introduced to Sequoia in the neutral territory of the front yard. Both dogs were kept on leashes initially as they sniffed each other carefully. Cooper was calm and friendly, not pushy or aggressive. After a few minutes of cautious investigation, he gave a play bow, inviting Sequoia to engage. She wasn't quite ready for that yet, but she didn't seem fearful either, which was a good sign. Inside the house, the family showed Sequoia around. Her bed was positioned in a corner of the living room, where she could see everything but also had a sense of security with walls on 2 sides. There were toys scattered around, bowls with her name on them, and even a special blanket that smelled like the rescue center, provided by the woman to help with the transition. The backyard was Sequoia's favorite discovery. It was enclosed by a tall fence, meaning she could explore safely without being tethered. There were trees for shade, soft grass to roll in, and interesting smells everywhere. She walked the perimeter carefully, nose to the ground, tail cautiously wagging. Emma followed at a distance, giving her space but remaining available if Sequoia wanted company. After the home visit, everyone gathered in the living room to discuss the final details. The woman sat with Sequoia, stroking her fur as the family reviewed the adoption contract. They talked about veterinary care, emergency contacts, and the importance of maintaining routines during the transition period. The family listened carefully, taking notes and asking thoughtful questions. The adoption was scheduled for the following week. This would give everyone time to prepare emotionally and practically for the big change. The woman explained to Sequoia during their remaining days together what was about to happen. She told her that she was going to live with Emma and her family, that she would have her own yard and a brother dog named Cooper, and that she would be loved and cared for every single day. The night before the adoption, Sequoia seemed restless. She paced around her bed at the center, unable to settle. The woman had anticipated this and arranged to spend the night with her. She brought a sleeping bag and set it up right next to Sequoia's bed. They lay there together in the quiet room, and the woman talked about all the adventures that awaited. She reminded Sequoia of how far she had come. From that scared, starving dog in the warehouse to this healthy, loving companion who was about to start a new chapter. She told her that it was okay to be nervous, that change was always a little scary even when it was good. But she also promised that the family who had chosen her would take care of her, would be patient with her fears, and would love her unconditionally. Morning arrived too quickly. The woman helped Sequoia with her breakfast, packed up her favorite toys and blanket, and prepared for the journey to her new home. The staff at the center gathered to say goodbye, each person offering gentle pets and words of encouragement. Even the other rescue dogs seemed to understand something significant was happening. Max came over and touched his nose to Sequoia's in what felt like a farewell, and Bella wagged her tail supportively. The car ride to the family's house was quiet. Sequoia sat in her carrier, but this time the door was partially open so she could see the woman sitting beside her. She kept one paw resting on the woman's hand through the carrier opening, maintaining that physical connection. The woman sang softly, old familiar songs that Sequoia had heard during their time together. When they pulled up to the house, the family was waiting on the porch. Emma had tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears. She had dreamed of this day, of finally bringing Sequoia home. The father and mother stood beside her, smiling warmly, but respecting the need to let Sequoia take her time adjusting. The woman carried Sequoia's things inside while Sequoia walked in on her own four paws, taking in all the familiar smells from the home visit. Cooper appeared, tail wagging gently, and this time Sequoia felt brave enough to approach him. They touched noses and something clicked between them. He seemed to understand that she was nervous and needed a friend. He led her to the water bowl, showing her where everything was like a gracious host welcoming a guest. The hardest moment came when the woman had to leave. Sequoia understood what was happening when she picked up her bag and moved toward the door. The dog pressed herself against the woman's legs, looking up at her with pleading eyes. The woman knelt down, hugging Sequoia close, tears falling freely now. She whispered promises about visiting, about checking in, about always being there if Sequoia needed her. Emma came and sat on the floor next to them, placing a gentle hand on Sequoia's back. It was a symbolic passing of the torch, from the woman who had saved her life to the girl who would cherish it. The woman stood slowly, gave final instructions to the family, and walked out the door. Sequoia watched through the window as the car pulled away, feeling a deep ache in her chest. But then Emma's arms were around her, and Cooper was pressing his warm body against her side, and the mother was offering treats, and the father was suggesting a walk in the backyard. This family had prepared for this moment, knowing that the transition would be difficult. They surrounded Sequoia with love and patience, helping her navigate these first hours without the woman who had been her anchor. As the day progressed, Sequoia began to relax into her new environment. She explored every corner of the house, checked out her new bed multiple times, and even engaged in a brief play session with Cooper when he brought her a toy. Emma stayed close by, reading aloud from her spot on the couch, providing that calm presence that Sequoia had come to appreciate. Dinner time arrived, and Sequoia ate from her new bowl with her name engraved on it. The food was the same high-quality kind she had been eating at the center, ensuring consistency during the transition. After dinner, the family settled in the living room to watch television, and Sequoia found herself on the couch between Emma and her mother, accepting gentle pets and feeling surprisingly content. That first night in her new home, Sequoia experienced moments of anxiety. The sounds were different, the shadows unfamiliar, and she missed the woman's presence. But whenever she felt scared, Cooper would come over to her bed and lie down nearby as if standing guard. Emma had set up a small night light, remembering what the woman had said about Sequoia's fear of complete darkness. Around midnight, when Sequoia whimpered softly, Emma appeared in her pajamas. Without a word, she grabbed a pillow and blanket and made a bed on the floor next to Sequoia. She reached out and rested her hand on Sequoia's side, and the steady breathing of this kind girl helped calm the dog's racing heart. They fell asleep like that, a girl and her rescue dog beginning their journey together. The first few weeks in her new home were a delicate dance of adjustment for Sequoia. Some days were easier than others. There were mornings when she woke up forgetting where she was, her heart racing until Emma's familiar face appeared. There were moments when sudden noises would send her scrambling to her safe corner, and patient family members would simply wait until she felt brave enough to emerge. But there were also beautiful moments of progress. The first time Sequoia voluntarily jumped onto the couch to sit next to the father while he watched television. The morning she initiated play with Cooper, grabbing one end of a rope toy and engaging in a gentle tug-of-war. The afternoon she followed the mother into the kitchen and sat hopefully near the counter. Having learned that this was where treats sometimes appeared, Emma became Sequoia's primary person. Much like the woman from the rescue center had been, the girl seemed to have an intuitive understanding of what Sequoia needed. She never pushed too hard or moved too fast. When Sequoia wanted space, Emma respected it. When Sequoia sought comfort, Emma was always available with gentle hands and soothing words. School was a challenge for Emma because it meant leaving Sequoia for several hours each day. The first few times this happened, Sequoia paced anxiously by the door, whining softly. But the parents worked from home and provided company, and Cooper proved to be an excellent companion. The older dog seemed to take his role as Sequoia's guide seriously, showing her the ropes of living in a family. Cooper taught Sequoia important things. He showed her that when the doorbell rang, it usually meant friends arriving, not danger. He demonstrated how to beg for food at the dinner table, though the parents discouraged this behavior in both dogs. He revealed the best spots in the backyard for sunbathing and where to dig without getting into trouble. Most importantly, he showed her that this was a safe home where dogs were valued members of the family. True to her promise, the woman who had rescued Sequoia came to visit regularly. The first visit happened just 3 days after the adoption. Sequoia heard her voice before she saw her and went racing to the door, tail wagging frantically. When the door opened and the woman knelt down, Sequoia practically bowled her over with enthusiasm. The reunion was joyful and affirming, proving that Sequoia could maintain bonds even while forming new ones. During these visits, the woman would check on Sequoia's progress, offer advice to the family, and spend quality time just being present. She brought updates about the other rescue dogs, including news that Bella had also been adopted, and Max was in a foster home. Hearing these stories seemed to comfort Sequoia, as if knowing her friends were also finding happiness helped her settle into her own. As winter approached, Sequoia experienced her first snow in her new home. She had probably seen snow before in her life, but she had no positive memories of it. When the white flakes started falling, Emma bundled up and took Sequoia outside. The dog stood on the porch, watching the transformation of the familiar yard into a white wonderland. Cooper bounded out and started rolling in the snow, demonstrating that this cold white stuff was actually fun. Sequoia took a tentative step, then another. The snow crunched under her paws in an interesting way. Emma threw a snowball and it exploded into powder when it hit the ground. Sequoia jumped back, startled, then moved forward to investigate. Within minutes, she was playing in the snow, chasing Cooper around the yard, leaving paw prints everywhere. The family started taking Sequoia on walks around the neighborhood. These outings were carefully managed at first. They avoided busy streets and loud areas, choosing quiet paths where Sequoia could build confidence gradually. Emma held the leash loosely, allowing Sequoia to set the pace. Sometimes they would walk for only 10 minutes before Sequoia showed signs of stress and they would head home. Other times she seemed to enjoy the adventure and would trot along happily for half an hour. During one of these walks, they encountered another dog walker. Sequoia immediately tensed, her old instincts kicking in, but Cooper was with them and greeted the other dog calmly. The stranger's dog was well-behaved and friendly. After watching Cooper's interaction, Sequoia cautiously approached and sniffed the new dog. It was brief but significant, another step forward in her socialization. The family celebrated holidays that first year, and each one brought new experiences for Sequoia. Halloween was challenging with its constant doorbell and strange costumes. The family kept her in a quiet room with calming music and her favorite blanket, protecting her from the overwhelming chaos. Thanksgiving was better, with the house full of delicious smells and Emma's grandparents visiting, both of whom were gentle and patient with the nervous dog. Christmas was magical. The family put up a tree and Sequoia was fascinated by the lights and ornaments. They hung a stocking with her name on it next to ones for the human family members and Cooper. On Christmas morning, she received new toys, special treats, and a cozy sweater for winter walks. Emma gave her an extra-long cuddle session and told her she was the best Christmas gift the family could have asked for. Throughout all of this, Sequoia continued to heal emotionally. The physical scars of her time on the streets had faded, but the psychological ones took longer. There were still triggers that would set her back. A dropped pan in the kitchen could send her hiding for an hour. A man in a hat similar to one worn by someone who had been cruel to her would make her cower, but the family never got frustrated with these reactions. They simply provided reassurance and gave her the time she needed to recover. Emma started documenting Sequoia's journey on social media with the family's permission. She shared photos and stories, always respectful of Sequoia's privacy and dignity. The posts attracted attention from other rescue advocates and people considering adoption. Emma used the platform to educate others about the patience required with rescue animals and the incredible rewards that came with giving a second chance to a dog in need. Messages poured in from people who had been inspired by Sequoia's story. Some had decided to adopt rescue dogs themselves. Others shared their own rescue stories, creating a community of support and understanding. The woman from the rescue center commented frequently, proud of both Sequoia's progress and the family's dedication. Spring arrived, bringing new life to the world and new confidence to Sequoia. She had been with the family for several months now, and the house truly felt like home. She knew the routine of the household, understood her place in the family structure, and had formed deep bonds with each person and with Cooper. Her tail wagged more often than it didn't. Her eyes sparkled with life and curiosity. She had gained weight, her coat was lustrous, and she moved with a confidence that would have seemed impossible months earlier. One warm spring afternoon, something extraordinary happened. The family was in the backyard, and Emma was lying on a blanket reading a book. Sequoia approached her, and instead of sitting nearby as she usually did, she climbed onto the blanket and laid her head directly in Emma's lap. It was a gesture of complete trust, a vulnerable position that the old Sequoia would never have allowed. Emma froze, not wanting to ruin the moment. She slowly moved her hand to rest on Sequoia's head, gently stroking her fur. Sequoia let out a deep sigh and closed her eyes, completely relaxed. The mother saw this from the kitchen window and had to wipe away tears. The father captured a photo that would become treasured family memory. Cooper watched from his sunny spot with what looked like satisfaction, as if he had known all along that this day would come. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Sequoia didn't retreat to her bed as she sometimes still did. Instead, she laid down near the table, close enough to be part of things but not begging for food. She watched the family interact, listened to their laughter and conversation, and felt a sense of belonging that was completely new to her. This was her pack. These were her people. This was home. A year had passed since that cold, rainy day when Sequoia had climbed into the carrier and left the warehouse behind. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The scared, emaciated dog who had cowered, in the shadows had become a confident, loving companion who greeted each day with enthusiasm and joy. Emma had grown too during this year. The responsibility of caring for a traumatized rescue dog had taught her patience, empathy, and the deep satisfaction that comes from helping another living being heal. She had learned to read Sequoia's subtle signals, to understand when she needed space and when she craved connection. The bond between the girl and the dog had become unbreakable. The rescue center organized an anniversary celebration for all the dogs who had been adopted that year. It was a chance for families to reunite, for staff to see the outcomes of their hard work, and for success stories to be shared. The woman who had rescued Sequoia had organized much of the event, and was particularly excited to see how all her special cases had progressed. When the day of the celebration arrived, the family loaded both Sequoia and Cooper into the car. Sequoia had become a confident traveler, no longer needing the carrier. She sat in the back seat with Emma, looking out the window with interest at the passing scenery. Her tail wagged when she recognized familiar landmarks near the rescue center. As they pulled into the parking lot, Sequoia's excitement was palpable. Her nose twitched, catching familiar scents. When they opened the car door, she jumped out eagerly, pulling Emma toward the entrance. The outdoor area had been set up with play zones, agility equipment, and stations with treats and water. Dozens of dogs were already there with their families, all of them rescue success stories. The moment the woman saw Sequoia, she let out a cry of joy and rushed over. Sequoia's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. She jumped up, something she rarely did anymore, her whole body wiggling with happiness. The woman knelt down and wrapped her arms around the dog, both of them lost in the reunion. Tears streamed down the woman's face as she felt the solid, healthy body of the dog she had saved. They spent several minutes like that, reconnecting before the woman pulled back to really look at Sequoia. The change was breathtaking. This was not the same dog she had coaxed out of that warehouse. This dog had bright, clear eyes full of intelligence and trust. Her coat gleamed in the sunlight. Her body was strong and well-proportioned. But most importantly, there was an unmistakable happiness radiating from her. Other familiar faces appeared throughout the day. Bella came running over, now confident and playful, barely recognizable as the timid terrier from the recovery room. She and Sequoia touched noses and then immediately engaged in a play-bow, chasing each other around the yard like old friends. Max arrived with his foster family, who had decided they couldn't let him go and had officially adopted him. The old golden retriever moved slower than the younger dogs, but his eyes were bright and content. Dr. Sarah was there too, conducting friendly health checks and answering questions from new rescue families. When she saw Sequoia, she called out in delight. She examined her quickly, more out of professional curiosity than necessity, and declared her in perfect health. The infections were long gone, the weight was ideal, and the spirit that had been so damaged was clearly thriving. The event included an adoption story segment where families could share their experiences. Emma volunteered to speak about Sequoia. She stood before the crowd, holding the microphone with slightly shaking hands, Sequoia sitting calmly by her side. Emma talked about the first time they met, about the challenges of the early days, and about the incredible joy of watching Sequoia learn to trust and love again. She spoke about the small victories that had meant so much. The first time Sequoia wagged her tail, the first time she played with a toy, the first time she voluntarily sought affection. Emma talked about what Sequoia had taught her about resilience, about second chances, and about the capacity for healing. By the time she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. The woman took the microphone next and shared Sequoia's rescue story from her perspective. She described finding that terrified dog in the warehouse, the weeks of patient visits, and the leap of faith when Sequoia finally trusted enough to be rescued. She talked about the satisfaction of seeing animals transform through proper care and love, and how families like Emma's made all the difficult work worthwhile. As the celebration continued, Sequoia participated in some of the activities. She navigated an easy agility course, something that would have been unthinkable a year ago. She participated in a group training demonstration, showing off the commands she had learned. She socialized with other dogs, playing appropriately and confidently. Every activity showcased just how far she had come. The family won an award for most inspirational transformation, receiving a certificate and a basket of dog goodies. But more valuable than any prize was the community they found that day. They met other families dealing with rescue dog challenges, exchanged contact information, and formed support networks. They learned they weren't alone in the journey and that every rescue story, while unique, shared common threads of patience and love. As the sun began to set and the event wound down, the woman walked with Sequoia and Emma one last time around the rescue center grounds. They passed the recovery room where Sequoia had spent her first nights after rescue. They walked by the yard where she had run freely for the first time. The woman pointed out all the places that had been part of Sequoia's healing journey. She told Emma how proud she was of the family's dedication, how perfectly they had handled the challenges, and how clearly Sequoia had blossomed in their care. Emma thanked her for saving Sequoia, for giving her the chance at this life. The woman smiled and said that rescue work wasn't about one person saving an animal. It was about many people coming together to create a better outcome than any individual could achieve alone. Before they left, they took photos together. Sequoia with the woman who rescued her, Sequoia with Emma and her family, Sequoia with her rescue center friends, and a group photo of all the success stories from that year. These images would be shared widely, inspiring others to consider rescue adoption and showing the world that broken things could be made whole with patience and love. The drive home was quiet, with Sequoia curled up next to Emma, exhausted from the excitement of the day but deeply content. When they arrived home, Cooper greeted them at the door, having stayed behind with a neighbor. Sequoia touched noses with him, as if telling him about her adventures, then headed to her water bowl for a long drink. That night, as the family settled into their evening routine, Sequoia moved around the house with complete confidence and ease. She checked on each family member, accepting pets and giving affection freely. She played briefly with Cooper, then settled onto her favorite spot on the couch between Emma and her mother. As Emma stroked her fur and the television played softly in the background, Sequoia reflected on her journey in whatever way dogs do. From the cold warehouse to this warm home, from starvation to abundance, from fear to trust, from loneliness to love. Every step of the journey had led her here, to this moment, to this family, to this life. She thought about the woman who had saved her, who had seen beyond the scared, starving creature to the loving companion underneath. She thought about all the people at the rescue center who had cared for her and believed in her. She thought about Emma and her family who had opened their home and hearts, giving her not just shelter but a true forever home. The old Sequoia was gone, replaced by this new version who knew love and security. Yet the experiences of her past weren't forgotten. They had shaped her, made her appreciate every good thing in her life, and given her a story that could inspire others. She was living proof that no matter how dark the beginning, a story could have a beautiful middle and a happy ending. As sleep began to claim her, surrounded by her family in the house that smelled like home, Sequoia felt something she had never experienced in those desperate warehouse days. She felt grateful. Grateful for second chances. Grateful for patient humans. Grateful for love that asked nothing in return but gave everything freely. Her last thought before drifting off was simple and profound. She was home, she was loved, she was safe, and she was exactly where she belonged. The journey from starved and scared to loving and thriving was complete. Sequoia had not just survived. She had flourished, and in doing so, she had touched countless lives and inspired many others to open their hearts to rescue animals. Her story, from desperate beginning to joyful present, would continue to ripple outward, creating hope and encouraging compassion wherever it was shared. This was not just Sequoia's happy ending. It was her happy beginning, the start of a life filled with all the love and security every dog deserves. Days turned into weeks at the rescue center, and Sequoia began to understand something she had never experienced before. Routine. Every morning started the same way. Breakfast arrived at the same time, served by staff members who moved quietly and spoke gently. The woman who had rescued her visited every single day without fail, usually staying for several hours to sit with Sequoia and help her adjust to her new life. The other dogs in the recovery room became familiar presences. There was an old golden retriever named Max who had been found abandoned when his family moved away. He had sad eyes but a gentle spirit, and he never tried to invade Sequoia's space. Then there was Bella, a small terrier mix who had been rescued from a hoarding situation. She was nervous like Sequoia, but had started to come out of her shell. Watching these other dogs interact with the staff and volunteers taught Sequoia important lessons. She saw that when hands reached toward them, it was usually to offer comfort or treats, not to hurt. She noticed that the humans here moved slowly and spoke kindly, giving warnings before doing anything that might startle a dog. The center operated on a foundation of respect and patience that was completely foreign to Sequoia's previous experiences. Dr. Sarah continued Sequoia's medical treatments. The infections were responding to medication, and the parasites had been eliminated. Most importantly, Sequoia was gaining weight. Each week when she stepped onto the scale, the numbers went up, and the staff celebrated these small victories. Her ribs were no longer so prominent, and her coat was growing and healthier now that she was receiving proper nutrition and care. The transformation wasn't just physical. Something was changing inside Sequoia too. The constant state of fear that had defined her existence was beginning to ease. She started to anticipate meal times with something that felt almost like happiness. When she heard the woman's voice in the hallway, her tail would begin to wag before she even appeared in the doorway. One breakthrough day came when a volunteer named Tom was sitting on the floor reading a book. Sequoia had seen him around but had never interacted with him. Something about his calm energy and the fact that he wasn't paying attention to her made him less threatening. She found herself slowly moving closer to him, inch by inch, until she was sitting just a few feet away. Tom glanced up from his book and smiled at her but didn't make any sudden moves. He simply went back to reading, occasionally commenting aloud about the story as if talking to himself. After about 15 minutes of this, Sequoia did something incredibly brave. She moved close enough that Tom could reach out and touch her if he wanted to. Her heart pounded, but she held her ground. Tom slowly extended his hand, letting her sniff it. When she didn't move away, he gently scratched behind her ear. The sensation was incredible. Sequoia had forgotten how good a kind touch could feel. She leaned into his hand slightly, and Tom's face lit up with joy. He continued the gentle scratching, and for the first time since her rescue, Sequoia felt something close to contentment. This moment marked a turning point. Over the following days, Sequoia began accepting attention from more staff members and volunteers. She learned that play was not only allowed but encouraged. The woman brought her new toys, showing her how to interact with them. At first, Sequoia just watched, confused by the concept. But when she saw Bella chasing a ball and seeming to enjoy it, curiosity got the better of her. Her first attempt at play was awkward and hesitant. The woman rolled a soft ball toward her, and Sequoia poked it with her nose. It rolled back and something sparked in her brain. She poked it again, harder this time. The ball rolled across the room, and without thinking, Sequoia chased after it. When she caught up to it, she looked back at the woman with what could only be described as surprise and delight. The woman clapped and praised her enthusiastically. They played together for several minutes, and by the end, Sequoia was panting happily, her tail wagging steadily. It was exhausting, but in the best possible way. That night, she slept more deeply than she had since arriving at the center, clutching her favorite toy between her paws. As Sequoia's physical health improved and her emotional wounds began to heal, the staff started discussing the next phase of her journey, finding her a forever home. The woman explained this to her during one of their daily visits, talking about how they needed to find the perfect family who would understand Sequoia's special needs and give her the patient, loving environment she deserved. The idea of leaving the center filled Sequoia with mixed emotions. She had grown comfortable here. She knew the routines, trusted the people, and felt safe in her familiar space. The thought of going somewhere new brought back echoes of old fears. But the woman assured her that they would be very careful in choosing her new home, and that she would help with the transition every step of the way. Meanwhile, Sequoia continued making progress in small but meaningful ways. She learned to walk on a leash, something that initially terrified her because it meant being restrained. But the woman made it into a game, rewarding every step Sequoia took willingly with treats and praise. Eventually, Sequoia discovered that walks meant exploring new smells, feeling grass under her paws, and spending time with her favorite person. One sunny afternoon, they ventured outside to the center's small yard for the first time. Sequoia stepped onto the grass cautiously, as if testing whether it was real. The feeling of earth beneath her feet, the warmth of sunshine on her back, and the fresh air filling her lungs created a sensory experience that was almost overwhelming. She stood frozen for a moment, processing all these wonderful sensations at once. Then she ran. Not in fear or panic, but in pure, unbridled joy. She ran in circles around the yard, her ears flapping, her tail streaming behind her like a flag. The woman laughed with delight, and several staff members came out to watch. This broken, terrified dog who had cowered in a warehouse just weeks ago was now running freely, expressing happiness in the most fundamental way a dog knows how. When Sequoia finally tired herself out, she trotted back to the woman and sat down beside her, leaning against her leg. It was a gesture of trust and affection that brought tears to the woman's eyes. She wrapped her arms gently around Sequoia and whispered, "You're going to make someone very happy someday. You're such a special girl." The training continued as Sequoia learned basic commands. Sit, stay, come. These weren't just tricks, but ways to communicate and build confidence. Each command she mastered made her stand a little taller, made her eyes shine a little brighter. She was discovering her own worth, learning that she was capable and intelligent and deserving of good things. The staff noticed that Sequoia had become a source of inspiration for the other rescue dogs. When new, frightened animals arrived at the center, they would watch how Sequoia interacted with the humans. If she could overcome her fears, maybe they could too. She had inadvertently become a therapy dog for her fellow rescues, showing them through her example that healing was possible. As weeks turned into months, Sequoia had transformed so completely that anyone who had known her in the warehouse would barely recognize her. Her coat was full and shiny, her body was at a healthy weight, and most importantly, her eyes sparkled with life and hope. She had learned to trust, to play, to love, and to believe in the possibility of happiness. The woman watched these changes with pride and a bittersweet feeling. She knew that soon Sequoia would be ready for adoption. The dog who had once been too scared to let anyone touch her was now affectionate and playful. The next chapter of Sequoia's life was about to begin, and it promised to be filled with all the love and security she had been denied for so long.